Okay, so here we are, and we're going to try to create a walk cycle using reference images. So here are my reference images. I have 10, and I'll be importing them into Flash and using them as a guide to create my walk cycle. Alright, so what do we need? We need to open Flash. Okay, ActionScript 3.0, cool, sounds good. Alright. Here we go, so here's my document. If you wanted to change the size of my document, I can go to Properties, Size. So for the project, I think it's 1080 by 720, but I'm just going to leave it as it is for now, because I think my reference images are quite small. Okay, so I need to import my images. So File, Import, Import to Library. So my walk 10 photos, I can left click, hold shift, left click, so I'll highlight all of them and open. Okay, and then you'll notice in my library I've got all the images I need. Perfect. Okay, so on a single layer we can double click this to change the name. We'll call this photo. Okay, so this is where I'll be putting my photo of the man walking. A left click and drag frame 1 into the shot. Looks good. Cool. So I'll put it roughly in the middle. Now I can zoom in a little bit. So if I press Z for the magnifying glass and left click, I'll zoom in. I can get a better look at it. Alright, cool. So go back to my selection tool, which is V. Okay, so now if I was to press F6, you'll notice it's inserted another keyframe, so it's made a duplicate of that original keyframe. So if I go back with comma and full stop, I can go back and forth in my timeline. It looks like nothing is happening, but it's actually moving forward a frame where I've made a duplicate of that image. So if I go to the second frame of my timeline, right click on my image, swap bitmap, go to frame 2. Okay, now you notice when I toggle back and forth using comma and full stop, it's got those two images. So I need to continue doing that. So I go to second frame, F6 again, it's made a duplicate of it. So make sure I'm on the third frame now. Right click, swap bitmap, frame 3, and okay. So I'll continue to do this until I have all 10 pictures out on each individual frame on 10 frames. So F6 again, right click, swap bitmap, frame. Okay, again, F6, right click, swap bitmap, frame 3. Alrighty, and I'll continue to do that until I have all 10 pictures of the naked man walking. F6, right click on my image, swap bitmap, frame 9, okay, F6, right click, swap bitmap, frame 10. Okay, cool. So now you see when I drag back and forth on my timeline, I've got a man walking. If I press enter, I can watch this. You notice it stops at the end. If I want to loop, I can go to control, loop playback, and now when I press enter, it'll continuously loop. This is good. Okay, good. So I'll stop that for now. So now I want to insert a new layer. So left click, new layer, double left click to change the name. I'll call this one ground. So I'm going to create a ground so I know roughly where the man's walking, so I can alter my walk cycle based on where I think the ground level is. Otherwise it's hard to work because everything's floating around. It's hard to have without a guide, you won't know where you're supposed to make your character walk. Okay, so I can lock my photo layer, click, get my line tool, which is N. So you notice my stroke color is black, so I might change that to red. Okay, so now I can left click, and if I left click and hold it, I can drag it out. If I was to hold shift, it straightens that line for me. So let go. Okay. Now it's a little bit high for me, so I'll go V, which is my selection tool. I can click that line once, and I can just tap it down with my D-pad. A couple of taps. Okay, and that'll be our ground. Now I want to make sure I lock that layer so I don't accidentally edit it. So I'll just click the lock button there. And now you can see I am unable to edit anything. Okay. Not a problem. I'll just unclick that. So unselect it. Okay. Now I'll look. Okay, good. Cool. So now when I play it, it's just a man walking on that red ground line that I've created. Stop that. Okay. Cool. Looking good. So now we need to create parts of his body that we can animate. So I need to create a new layer. This one I'll call leg lower. Okay, so now make sure I'm in the first frame of layer leg lower. I'll get my rectangle tool, which is R, the shortcut. Now the stroke outline is red. I might left click that, change it to black, but I don't mind the fill color pink. It's not bad. Maybe I'll get a slightly different pink. Okay, so I'll draw roughly the shape of his leg, the bottom half of his leg, which is roughly like that. So from his knee to the bottom of his heel, and I've got that shape there. Now if I press V, which is my selection tool, I can left click and I can highlight that object I've created. So make sure it's all selected. If I just select it by clicking, I may only select the fill color. So you'll notice if I move that around, it's left the outline there. So I want to make sure I highlight all of it. So left click outside of it, drag, let go, and I've selected all of it. F8. So we'll convert to new symbol. I'll call this leg lower. Make sure the type is a graphic. And press OK. And it's created a new symbol in my library called leg lower. If I wanted to alter it, I have to double left click. And you'll notice here on my page it's called leg lower, which means I'm just altering that symbol. If I left click on scene 1, I go back to my big project. But if I wanted to alter that particular symbol, double left click, and you'll notice it's changed there, the name, and now I can alter it. So if I was to draw a line on it, say that was part of my design, when I go back to scene 1, it's become part of that symbol. But I want to undo that for now because I don't exactly want a line running through his leg. Okay, so I've selected that. Now press Q, which is a transformation tool. If I press Q, okay, now you can see I'm able to transform it. Now I want to click that pivot point in the middle, this little white point. Left click it, hold, drag it to the top, so roughly where his knee is. And now I'm able to pivot that object based on where I've put the pivot point. So it'll rotate around that object. Okay, so if I were to left click it and drag it, I can put that pivot point roughly where his knee is. And I'm able to pivot it. So roughly it's on the same angle as his leg. Okay, cool. Not bad, looking good. So now make sure I'm on the first frame. Okay, so I want to go to the second frame. Click it. F6 will insert a new keyframe, so it makes a duplicate of it. So you can see when I go back and forth, the picture in the background changes, but I've made a duplicate of my symbol frame. And I want to grab that, left click, move the pivot point roughly where his knee is, pivot it out so it's on the right angle, and I'm happy with that. Now when I toggle back and forth, you can see it follows the same as the picture. So I continue to do that. So in the third frame, F6, move where the pivot point is, slightly pivot it. Okay. F6 again, so it's copied the frame, drag it roughly where the knee is, and pivot it if I need to be. Okay, F6 again, left click, drag where the knee is, left click, and pivot. So I continue to do that, F6, roughly where the knee is, pivot it. F6, put it roughly where the knee is, slightly pivot it, F6, slightly where the knee is, pivot it, F6, slightly where the knee is. Make sure I don't get confused and put it on the wrong knee. So we're working with his right leg, pivot that, F6, roughly where his knee is, and pivot it. So now when I toggle back and forth, you'll notice it follows his leg. If I'm to press enter, now you can see it's kind of like he's wearing a cricket pad or something. Okay, I like it. Easy. Okay, so now if I was to press command return, wait a sec, command return, you'll notice it plays the little movie. Now I can see the photos, my reference guide, and I can see my ground, which I don't really want to view in my final movie. So to fix this, I right click on the layer that says ground, and I turn it into a guide layer. So you notice it changes there. So again with the photo, left click, so I'm on the right layer, photo, right click, turn into a guide. Now you'll notice when I press command return, it only plays the symbol, the leg lower layer, which is good. Okay, so now I'll create the top half of his leg. So I want to lock that leg lower just so I don't accidentally modify it. So I'll left click it, insert a new layer. I'll left click and drag it up the top just so it's a bit more organized. Now if I don't have enough space to see everything, I can notice when I drag my mouse it changes to that symbol. If I left click, I can drag, I can move it so I can see more of my timeline. Okay, so we're working with layer 4, so I'll double left click it. I'll change this and turn it, call it leg upper. Okay, so using my rectangle tool again, this time I might change the color. So I'll left click fill color, I'll pick a nice green. So I'll draw roughly the shape of his leg, something like that. Beautiful. So V for my selection tool, left click and drag, so I highlight the whole section. So we want to convert it to a symbol, so I press F8. We'll call this leg upper. Make sure it's a graphic. And okay, now we've got leg lower and leg upper in my library. So left click, okay. So now I want to press Q for my transformation tool. And I want to move the pivot point. So this time I want to put the pivot point roughly where his hip is, I reckon. So I'll let go, okay, looks good. Left click and drag it roughly where his hip is. And then I can pivot it. Okay, now you want to make sure your two objects are overlapping. I don't want to have a big gap in the middle, because then when it starts to animate, so you'll notice when I play my movie, when it starts to animate, there's a big gap between the top half of his leg and the bottom half of his leg. So I want to make sure that the objects are big enough that they overlap. So again, I'll put it roughly where I need it. So the pivot point is where his hip is, and then I've pivoted it so it's roughly on the same angle, and it looks good. And now what I can do for a little shortcut, instead of pressing F6 every time to create new keyframes, and then modifying it one by one, I can left click in the start of the time frame, hold shift, left click at the end of the time frame. Now when I press F6, it'll put insert a keyframe into every frame that I've highlighted. So now I can go by, so I can toggle with comma and full stop. So if I press full stop, I go forward a frame. I can select what I want to change. So I move it roughly where his hip is. I can pivot it like that, toggle forward with full stop, and this way it just makes the process a lot quicker. So put it roughly where his hip is, pivot it, roughly where his hip is, pivot. So put that pivot point roughly where his hip is and pivot it again. So you notice as I press full stop, it moves forward a frame. When I press comma, it moves backwards a frame. So I often use full stop and comma. It's easier than going up here and modifying frames like that. And that way I'm more precise and I can just go and I know I'm only going to jump forward one frame. So forward one frame, pretty happy with that, roughly where his hip is. Okay, so if I go back and forth, nice, doesn't look too bad at all. Okay, cool. So command return so I can watch it, and that's his little leg wobbling around. Alrighty, looks good. What else do we need? That's a good question. I might put his torso in just so it looks a bit more like a man and less like a wobbly green and pink stick. Okay, so I want to lock that layer to make sure I can't modify it at all. So now when I'm clicking, I can't actually modify it. These locks are very important because you don't want to accidentally move things around. So I'll create a new layer, double click, I'll call this one torso. Make sure I'm in the first frame. So I get my rectangle tool again. This time I'll modify the color. I'll get a nice yellow, a yucky yellow. So I'll make it roughly the shape of his torso. So again, I want to make it so it overlaps. I don't want to make it too short, so there's gaps in between. I want to make it so it overlaps where his hip joint is. So something roughly like that. Press V for my selection tool. Left click and drag. F8 to convert to symbol. And I'll call this one torso. Okay, so now I've got torso in my library. So I want to alter the pivot point. Now you can decide where you want to put the pivot point, but for his torso, if I was doing the whole torso, I'd put it roughly where his hip joint is again. So Q for free transformation tool, click and drag the pivot point, so roughly where his hip is. And then I can move that object roughly where his torso is. So what I do for a little trick is that I try to find a point where I can line it up. So I might want to line up this corner here to roughly to his body there. So I might do it like that. So this is all highlighted up here, but if it wasn't highlighted, I can left click the first frame, hold shift, left click the last frame. Now I've got all that highlighted. F6 will insert all keyframes. Now I can just go back and forth with comma and full stop. And I can slightly modify it. Now it doesn't really twist much, so I don't have to worry so much about using the pivot point. So if I go to my selection tool, I can get a better look without the confusion of all the transformation tool little edges on it, but I can still move it. So I've got that reference point up there. So I'll go back and forth. You notice he moves up. So I can move the body up there. Reference point here again. So that place on his body, reference point. So I'll go back and forth. That one moves forward a little bit. That's pretty good. That one moves up a little bit. Okay, not bad. So I'll test my movie. Alrighty, looks good. Now you might want that layer of his body behind these layers of his leg. So rather than this object being in front, so I can left click that layer, bring it back, let go, and now you'll notice behind. So the way it works is whatever's on top of your timeline is what you'll see first, and everything following will go in that pattern. So that's my top layer, and my second layer is the pink, leg lower, the third layer is torso, and so forth. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. Cool. Now a little trick is, rather than me having to animate the second leg, I can just copy the animation of my first leg and move it in the timeline. So if I was to lock torso, because I don't want to alter that at all, and I'll unlock leg lower layer and leg upper layer, left click the first frame that I want to select, hold shift, left click the last frame, so I've selected both leg upper and leg lower. Before I do that, sorry, so I'll left click my layer, leg upper, hold shift, left click leg lower, and I want to right click in layers and duplicate layers. So now I've made duplications of those layers. You won't be able to see it here because they're behind it. So it's one layer on top of another layer, so it's exactly lined up, so that's why you can't see it. But I'll lock leg lower and leg upper, my original, and then with the copies, I might double click so I can alter the name, and I might call this his left leg. So I can either write left or L or right left. So again, double click to change the name, left. Alright, cool. So now when it plays, there's duplicates of his leg, except it's lined up exactly so we can't actually see it. So because we've got 10 frames, what I'm going to do is left click in leg upper left, so these are the copies we've made, hold shift, left click, so I highlight that entire section. Now if I left click and drag, I can move those frames. So I'll move it to, so the start of those frames goes to layer 5. So you notice what I've done there. I might even go forward one more. Okay, and I'll put it there. So it overlaps here. So it goes to frame 15 now. So one leg walks for a little bit, and then the other leg comes in, and then the other leg works. Okay, cool. So I want to reselect. So now I just want to select the cut over bit. So left click there, hold shift, left click. Okay, now if I left click and drag, I can bring it back. And now I should have a rough animation of legs walking. Now I've got this cutover period, which is just a still frame for 5 frames. So if I want to get rid of that, again, I can left click once, hold shift, left click the whole area that I want to get rid of, right click, and remove frames. Now my animation only goes for 10 frames. Okay, looking good. So now when I press enter, got 2 little legs wobbling around. Cool. So again, all these legs are in front of the torso. So I might want to put my left legs. So select them, and I'll put them behind the torso. Okay, looking good. So command enter, and I can watch it, and my little man quickly walking. Looks good. It's not bad, but we need to smooth it out a bit, I reckon. So what I want to do to smooth it out is I'll unlock the layers, so all my legs and all my torso, and make sure I left in this little box. This determines where I'm looking at it in the timeline. So if I left click and bring it to my first frame, it'll highlight everything. If I insert a frame, it'll insert it to every layer. So I'll make sure it's on the first frame, press F5 this time. Now what it's done, it's made that one image, and rather than inserting a new keyframe, it's just extended that keyframe, so now it goes for 2 frames. So if I move back and forth, it looks like a still image, but it's actually going for 2 frames, and then it cuts to 3rd frame. So again, I move it to the next one, so frame 3, F5, and then it'll extend it there as well. Next frame. Oh, made a mistake. Alright, cool. I accidentally pressed F4, which did something crazy. Don't worry about that. Okay, so I can move forward with full stop. Might be a bit safer. F5, full stop, 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 F5. Okay, cool. So now I've doubled the length of my animation. So before it was just going to 10 frames, now it's going to 20, because each individual frame is held for 2 frames. Boom, 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 boom. So you notice when I play my animation, it's going to be slower. Okay, this is good. So it's not bad, but I can get it even smoother than that. So I left click, leg upper, hold shift, left click down the bottom of leg lower left. So I've highlighted that whole selection. Now right click and go to create classic tween. Okay, so now it'll animate it, and it makes it a smooth transition from one frame to the next. So if I play that, you notice, it's a lot smoother. Looks good, I like it. It's as easy as that. So what you can do now if you wanted to modify things, you can muck around, give it a bit of style, give it a bit of personality. So say if like as he was walking, I might just hide my photo for a second. So if I just press there, I can hide it. Okay, so as he's walking, I might want him to kick his leg out a bit further. So I could go to that frame there. And if I wanted to modify it, so I press Q and I can transform it a bit. I could swing it out a bit more, make sure his knee's connected. And I can swing that out, and now you'll notice he swings that one leg out quite a lot. Boop. I can do the same with the other leg. So again, on the extension, rotate it, rotate that one. Oh, now I've actually gone into the symbol, so just to go back, go into scene 1. Alright, now when I play it, he kind of kicks his leg out. Doo, 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 doo. Looks good. Well, that's pretty much it. So you can imagine how I could continue on using my reference to create a walk cycle, or I could take photos of my friend walking and I could use them as a reference guide. So you can see how you could create your animation. Now I'm just using squares for my symbols. Obviously your pictures will be a lot better than just squares. But one trick you can do, so if I was to prepare and cut out my character's limbs in another program, say Photoshop, I can then, so here's one I prepared earlier, so File, Import to Library, and now I've got, where is it, I've called it, it's in Harry. So you notice I've taken photos of Marty McFly. Let's have a good look at him. Marty McFly from Back to the Future. So I've taken a few images. So I've got his shoe, I've got a guy's shirt, Marty McFly's head. Now what you can do, so I've taken it into Photoshop and I've cut it up. So there's no background, and I've created it into a PNG so the background is clear. So I'm going to import my head image of Marty McFly. So just click it, okay. Now you notice it's in my library, just his head image. So again, when I wanted to alter something, say if I wanted to alter the look of his torso, I could left click it, double left click, and now I'm inside the torso symbol. I might create a new layer. I'll call this one head. Now make sure I'm on that layer. And I can left click and drag and bring in Marty McFly's head. Well, it's pretty big. Minimize the size, left click. If I hold shift, it will make sure it stays the same aspect ratio. Okay, so I can put that on top of my torso layer. Okay, and now because I've already done my animation, I don't need to animate that head at all. So I go back into my scene. And now when I play the movie, he moves as if he was the torso as before. And now you can see how you can make a pretty effective animation. It kind of looks like some crazy South Park fish Marty McFly walking head man guy. And it's as simple as that. And there's your walk cycle. Cool. Enjoy!